Hello, everyone. It's Lori Ringard here. I'm just letting you know that we'll start in a few minutes. We have such a great turnout tonight that we're just letting everyone into the space. So just sit back and relax, and we'll start in a few minutes. Well, good evening, everyone. I think we can start. Uh,
Hello.
welcome, everyone. Hi,
Oh, lots of people.
yeah. Can
Good
I
little
ask,
event. Wow.
can I ask everyone to, first of all, mute?
Is my
Do you know
camera not working?
Can everybody mute their microphone? There's a little mute button. There's a microphone button on the bottom left. And if you can just click on that and mute your microphone. And also we're asking people to turn off your videos as well. If you can just hit that video camera on the bottom left.
Now, is that mute or unmute here?
There you go. There you go. Great, great. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. It's wonderful to have you join us tonight. We've got such a big crowd tonight. I've heard that we have over 140 people joining us or who have registered, and there's still people coming in tonight. So it's really exciting. As I said, I'm Lori Ringard, and I'm very honored to be the president of Save Our Seine. And this is one of our educational events, our first educational event of 2021, and it's hosted by the Land Care Committee. Welcome to you two, Martin and David, and if I could ask you to turn off your videos. There's a little button at the bottom of your screen that says stop video, and you just click on that. That's it. Great, great. Okay. So the topic tonight is threats to the ecological health of the Seine River forested greenway. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Save Our Seine Environment, Inc. is located on original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We honor and respect the Seine River and its surrounding land that we provide stewardship for at this time. So we're quite honored to be here. And I want to say happy St. Patrick's Day. And I did have a little piece of green on. I don't know if you're wearing your green tonight. I welcome that you can drink green drinks tonight for St. Patty's Day. And after all, we're having an environmental education session. So a little bit about Save Our Seine. Save Our Seine was established in 1990 as a nonprofit, community-based stewardship organization and it's a registered charity whose mandate is to protect, preserve, enhance, and promote the enjoyment of the Seine River Greenway, including associated shoreline, wetlands, contiguous natural forests, and grasslands in Winnipeg. The urban Seine River is part of the Lake Winnipeg watershed. Here's a little trivia for you. The Seine River Greenway is a 26-kilometer stretch of the Seine River. So it's one part of the Seine River. The Seine River actually stretches way down southeast Manitoba, and we have the urban piece of it. And it winds its way through St. Vital and St. Boniface. So it's quite an interesting river that we have here. So this is an educational event, as I said, hosted by the Save Our Seine Land Care Committee. And tonight we have our co-chairs who have done a lot of the work on organizing this, Leah Abelet and McKenna Short, who are the co-chairs of the committee. So thank you so much, Leah and McKenna, for all this work, and to your committee as well. And also want to thank Victoria Grima, who's also a board member, and she's in the background also helping with the technical parts of tonight. Now, as I said, I want to welcome all of you here tonight. It's a pleasure having you here. Welcome to our members. Membership, we do have a way for you to become a member now. You can go to our website and you can become a member. It's only $20, and that does give you the ability to run for election, to be on the board, and also to vote at our annual general meeting. So just encouraging people to do that. So I'd also like to recognize a couple of people that are in our audience tonight. Some elected officials, which I'm very happy and honored to have in our presence. First of all, I'd like to introduce or recognize, I should say, the Honorable Sarah Gilmar from representing Fort Richmond, and she's the Minister of Conservation and Climate. So thank you for joining us, Sarah. I'd also like to welcome our MLA Jamie Moses for St. Vital. Thank you for joining us. And also Dugald Lamont, our MLA for St. Boniface. Thank you for joining us. These were the people that we knew had registered as of this afternoon. So there may be some others, and if you're here, we welcome you. And please say hello in the chat if you are here. So we welcome all elected officials tonight. I would like to now, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter tonight. Our presenter is Chris Penner. Chris Penner is an applied native plant revegetation ecologist based in Winnipeg. He has approximately 18 years of experience designing and implementing native revegetation work on projects that vary in size and complexity for private developers, engineering firms, rural municipalities, as well as provincial and federal governments. He specializes in riparian, wetland, and upland revegetation using state-of-the-science procedures and performance criteria. So it is my pleasure now to welcome Chris.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
We can hear you. We can't see you yet, Chris.
Okay, here we go. Okay, here we are. All right, so McKenna, are you going to start the presentation or?
No, you can share on your screen, Chris.
Sharon's, oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. Here we go. Thanks.
Of course.
And share. You just have to bear with me for 1 second here.
Chris, you might want to put on slideshow there. Go to that where it says slideshow.
There we go. Yeah,
yeah.
no, it was covered by something here. Sorry about that.
Okay.
There we go. There we are.
Wonderful. We can see that perfectly.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for having me. I live about across the street from the Seine River in the Glen Lawn area, and my wife and I spend an awful lot of time on the river, and in winter, spring, fall, and summer. And it's certainly a real privilege to be able to have something like this in the city of Winnipeg, and I feel lucky to be able to live close by and just to walk across the street to get there. So the presentation I'm giving today is threats to the ecological health of the Seine River Greenway. I don't want to make it seem like it's apocalyptic or anything like that, but there are some things I wanted to address and bring to the attention of the SOS and anybody sitting in on this presentation. So I actually coincidentally got my start in this line of work in the early 2000s at doing native revegetation and wetland design and implementation, working with a team of professionals at Royalwood Phase 2. And that is basically where I learned about the Save Our Seine. And because this particular project, this development sits right adjacent to the Bois des Esprits. So the Seine River, as I'm sure all of you know who are familiar with the site, it's one of those few places you can go in the city of Winnipeg to feel like to get into nature, and to actually sometimes, depending on where you are, you get the sense that you're in some backcountry area rather than in the middle of a city. The Seine River changes character from throughout the season. I've got a number. This is basically a photograph-driven presentation. I've tried to keep the text down. There will be some questions at the end. I should mention, just say this right now. Sometimes the answers to questions that involve plants and biology and reclamation and that kind of stuff, the answers are "it depends," which can lead to some very long answers. So I'll try to get to the questions at the end and try to get them to them as efficiently as possible. The Seine, or just a few things quick facts here about the Seine River. Its headwaters are in the Sandylands Provincial Forest area. The river itself runs about 120 kilometers in length. I think I've got that accurate. It runs through about 9 rural municipalities, and the historic watershed is 2,100 square kilometers plus. I think that's been reduced somewhat due to drainage works in adjacent areas within the watershed. There are about 26 kilometers of urban greenway in the city of Winnipeg, and that's the Seine River Greenway. It's an important area for wildlife, for biodiversity, recreation. It's a riparian habitat, and the definition of a riparian area is basically the area of upland that is affected by the water, and that includes the high water mark. The high water mark and its duration on the river, on any river, it basically influences the distribution and the type of vegetation that grows from the shoreline up to the top of the slope. It's got a rich understory, a variety of species, most of them native. It's like I mentioned before, a year-round recreation. I'm always running into people on the river, especially in 2020, and for reasons we all know, there's a lot of people at home, and this has been a real treat to meet the neighborhood on the river. Snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, not so much for me. Nature watching for sure. Now, we all know there's beavers and blue jays and crows, but I just want to introduce to you a few of the characters that are going to be coming through our city in the next couple of months, around May. And the Greenway is a very critical habitat for native migratory species and resident birds. And now I could have put a picture of a blue jay here, but we all know what a blue jay looks like. But a lot of people I'm finding are maybe a little less familiar with some of the smaller birds that pass through the city and spend their time in the boreal forest or in the mixed woods just north of Winnipeg. We have the Canada warbler, which will migrate from as far away as Bolivia. The chestnut-sided warbler, so I'm going left to right across the top, chestnut-sided warbler, the hooded merganser, bottom left to right is the magnolia warbler, the American redstart, and the ruby crowned kinglet. And those are the birds that are going to be coming through here. And it's really great because you can sit on the banks of the river and any day, pretty much in around the middle of May, early to mid-May, and they'll just be, these birds will be moving through the greenway at past you at eye level. At that time of the year, there aren't very many leaves on the trees yet, so you do tend to get a very good look at them. And the Bois des Esprits is an important area for these birds. These are some of the birds that stay here, just a sampling them. Great crested flycatcher is the larger picture, and it has a very familiar call. I'm not set up to play those calls here. The Baltimore oriole, yellow warbler, the indigo bunting, scarlet tanager is not so common, but it's one of the first things I saw when I moved here. And you're always hearing rose-breasted grosbeaks. There's owls. There's two types of owls that hang out on our street and on the river. We have screech owls, and then we have horned owls. The horned owl, there's an owl plunge. I took that picture just a couple of weeks ago, actually. And Cooper's hawks, often associated with heavy wooded areas, and they essentially like to follow the migrants on their way north. There's also the occasional provincially listed vulnerable or rare species, this being the climbing bittersweet, but there are also a number of very uncommon species that do occur there. Now, in order to be able to really talk about ecosystem health or threats to ecosystem health, we have to maybe just set the groundwork here and discuss this very briefly, the subject of ecological resiliency. And basically what that is the capacity of a natural landscape to absorb a stress like a flood or a fire or insect infestation and to recover from that stress. It is essentially the ability to rebound, and it is the essence of what ecosystem health is, the ability to absorb stress and then recover. Threats to ecological resiliency are basically anything that interferes with an ecosystem's capability to regenerate after a disturbance. So a loss of key species, for instance, in an ecosystem, and remember these I can go back to them if you want me to, but general loss of biodiversity, okay, that's another one, habitat fragmentation, and noxious weed encroachment. And those 4 points are all very closely linked to one another for various reasons. Now, talking about disturbance, okay, some ecosystems, as I'm sure you've read or have heard, are disturbance driven or require a certain type of disturbance to maintain health and vigor. Grasslands, particularly the grasslands in the northern and eastern Great Plains, are very disturbance driven in that they need the occasional fire to get rid of the thatch that accumulates, as you can imagine, and restore the vigor, health, and productivity and competitiveness of the stand. Lodgepole pine stands, very dependent on disturbances, particularly fire. That's what triggers the regeneration of lodgepole pine seedlings. If it goes too long, then spruce could come in and replace it, which isn't necessarily the end of the world, but it's what happens when there are changes in the structure of an ecosystem when you delay or forestall or prevent disturbances from happening. Mixed wood forests, this is just a picture from Riding Mountain. Mixed wood, hardwood, softwood forests are some of the most productive and biologically diverse forests in North America. And they undergo, through a disturbance regime, massive structural changes from the immediate post-fire, fire being the traditional form of disturbance, through to mid-successional forms. So you go right after a fire, there would be a lot of saplings regenerating, a lot of shrubs, Grasses are an important part of that stage immediately after a fire. And then because aspen and some hardwoods tend to grow fairly quickly, those trees get the jump and form a canopy superstructure with softwoods like spruce coming up underneath. And put another 50 or 60 years on this, the aspen die off and you're left with a spruce forest. And then at that point, that particular piece of land is a little more vulnerable to a fire because of all the accumulated woody debris, and the whole cycle starts over again. In hardwood forests associated with rivers, though, the disturbance is a little less is different. It's not so much what you would call a disturbance-driven type of ecosystem. That maybe is being a little oversimplistic, but these areas aren't necessarily prone to things like fire, nor do they rely on fire to regenerate. Typically, what happens in these kinds of forests is that you have an uneven age and height class assemblage of trees, a diverse array of trees with a rich understory. Eventually, older trees that established first after the previous disturbance or canopy opening will die off, fall over, create an opening in the canopy, and that will change light conditions. And then what comes up underneath that would be, you hope, is another tree sapling or two combined with shrubs. So you'll find that when a tree falls over, or several trees fall over in a forest like this, you'll see that typically you'll get a lot of shrub and tree regeneration in those changing light conditions or in the improved light conditions. This is a shot from, this is a shot along the Seine River. It's one of my only summer shots, strangely enough, where you can see there's a mix of older trees, younger trees, smaller diameter, breast height trees, different height classes. So if something falls over, there's usually something there to replace it. There's regeneration or sapling recruitment at the understory level, usually waiting for an opening in the canopy to take advantage of that light. Now, natural forested areas and urban centers are generally left to fend for themselves, relying on natural intrinsic regenerative processes that I just described very briefly. The most sustainable way to maintain the health of these kind of forests, or really any kind of landscape, is to protect the natural successional processes or regeneration that enable that forest to reproduce itself. So when a tree falls over, this is a shot of basically American currant and chokecherry. There's a couple of saplings in the background. I know in this picture they're kind of obscured, but if a tree falls over in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, that's fine, as long as there's something desirable there to take advantage of that change in the environment. So what's the problem then? So we have some invasive species that occur along the Seine River. And I'll get into those in a moment. That's mainly the focus of my discussion, but it draws in other elements of forest management as well. The one in particular, and anybody who knows me will have heard me carrying on about this before in general, is the presence of European buckthorn. This is obviously European buckthorn is an introduced species. It was originally brought into the cities as a ornamental hedge type of application where you could shape it into whatever shape you wanted to. But what wasn't known was that if it's allowed to produce seed or left and just abandoned, let's say if the property was left, it would then start to spread around. And so it spreads from those areas and spreads into other areas like the Seine River in this particular case. But you'll see buckthorn is a very serious issue in the Assiniboine Park, but on the Seine, it's sporadic and localized. Some of the worst areas are kind of localized, so that's some of the good news. I just mentioned that. The good news is that heavy infestations are somewhat localized. Now go to the previous picture. This is a shot in October when everything else has gone to sleep and are dropping leaves and just tucked away for the fall and waiting for spring to come along. There's just a couple of species that are still green that aren't like a pine or a spruce, and that is European buckthorn is still wide awake and metabolizing in late September and early October. The only thing else that's green in that canopy height or that height would be things like the lilac. So usually in October or late September, that's when the presence of buckthorn really reveals itself. And this is a shot just basically the same location, just looking up the slope this time. And all of the understory vegetation you see in this particular shot those are all European buckthorn saplings. And the issue with them is that they can completely outcompete over time desirable vegetation, including tree saplings. So that ties into this natural succession cycle that I was talking about before. So over time, this kind of an issue can replace entire forests. That's it. The bad news is that if left unchecked, buckthorn will spread around slowly, but it does spread around, and it will replace native canopy. And it has done that in the States. It's done that in parts of Canada, and there are places where you can see some of that happening in Winnipeg. It spreads by seed primarily. It doesn't form lateral roots or rhizomes. It doesn't spread laterally. It produces seeds. It'll sucker from the base, but the seeds themselves each berry will produce a number of seeds, and each seed has the capability to sit in the seed bank for about 6 years or so. There's an excellent document that Manitoba Nature put out that describes this plant in detail. And perhaps I can post that document and make that information available to anybody listening that wants to get a hold of it or read it. So this picture was just taken out actually just last week. So you can see the leaves hanging on. They produce a lot of berries. The other one is reed canary grass, and this is one of the reasons why weeds are a problem is because they don't play nice with other native vegetation or desirable vegetation. Now, reed canary grass is great at revegetating a lower bank. Absolutely, it will do that on its own. You can actually buy the seed, believe it or not, and seed a low area in the field for pasture or for hay if you want. But it is a very aggressive weed. It's a noxious weed. And it has gotten in places, well, throughout the Seine River, but it's generally restricted to the lower banks because it is, after all, more of a wet meadow, shallow marsh type of plant. It is also somewhat confined by shade as well. So you'll see the yellow grass in this photograph it indicates where the reed canary is. And this shot is about a week old. But if there's a gap in the canopy, if the tree falls over, or if there's a disturbance that requires tree removal, it will come up the slope somewhat and take advantage of those light conditions, regardless of moisture. Well, it still requires a certain amount of moisture, but it will migrate upslope and occupy mid and upper slope positions in unmaintained areas. And then there's our friend Canada thistle. And Canada thistle is just there are a lot of people have mixed feelings about this because goldfinches seem to like Canada thistle. They seem to build their whole nesting schedule around the emergence of Canada thistle flowers and seed fluff. But it is one of those noxious weeds that will completely ensconce an area and will outcompete desirable vegetation if given the opportunity. Now, Canada thistle, we usually associate it with very well-lit conditions or roadside conditions or waste area conditions that are well-lit. But if you go into forests in partial shade conditions or lightly shaded conditions, it will infiltrate the forest and it'll gain a foothold. It might not have enough light to produce the energy to go to seed, but it'll gain a toehold. And when the canopy opens and if a tree falls over, there will be a change in light conditions, which will suddenly stimulate that plant to then go to seed and then continue spreading. This is an example of a very old laydown area from a past forestry operation. I just was on a backcountry terrestrial species inventory mission, and on a contract, and I had just snapped this shot. This is about 4 or 5 years ago, and I snapped it figuring it'd be useful one day to demonstrate a point. And yes, the point is that once thistle gets in, if there are no, say, proper restorative measures taken, or at least some restorative measures, it will get in and outcompete or prevent, or at least really slow down any kind of natural recolonization of that area by adjacent vegetation. The adjacent vegetation here are things like balsam poplar, and there's white spruce and balsam fir. And as you can see, very little has been able to get in the time since this area was last operational. Also, this is not an uncommon sight on Manitoba roadsides, but it is a severe example of a thistle infestation. And what happens here is this may have actually been a native revegetation site, but the procedures that are required to establish native revegetation maybe didn't get implemented in this case. And once thistles get in, they stick around for a long time, and they'll be raining seeds into this adjacent forest. Something comes over, the forest ages, something falls over, change of light conditions. That's how thistle spreads into these kinds of areas. But it's an avoidable thing. That's the good news about thistle. This kind of thing is avoidable. Now, back to the Seine River here. Over decades of American elm culling or removal to help control or mitigate the spread of Dutch elm disease, the canopy has undergone a shift towards ash. Now that varies in some places, but for the most part, ash has become the dominant, or at least co-dominant species in most riverbank positions on the mid and lower slopes, around the Red River, on the Assiniboine River, and certainly on the Seine. These are all ash trees. I think there might be an elm tucked away back in there, but these are all ash. Now, here's the thing. We have canopy. Ash are a great tree. They reestablish fairly readily. They're pretty competitive. However, if you have an area that is dominated by ash, especially in a high quality habitat area like this, what could possibly go wrong? Well, we have a new arrival in Winnipeg here. I think it's been here for a couple of years anyways, and it's made the news. We have the emerald ash borer beetle, which I'm not certain exactly how the presence of emerald ash borer is going to play out in Winnipeg. It may not be as apocalyptic as has been seen in other jurisdictions out east and toward the south. We don't know, but it could be that ash decline could be a slow burn here, as opposed to a massive apocalyptic wipeout of ash here. But the point is, we have ash-dominated canopies on a riverbank, and now we have a very serious threat to the survival of ash trees. And that's on top of other things that these trees need to deal with. One fairly recent arrival is the cottony ash psyllid. I think it's been here since the early 2010s. Correct me if I'm wrong. It mainly affects Manchurian and black ash here, or hybrids thereof, not so much green ash. Oak is a very important tree on the kind of the mid-slope and upper banks of the Seine River. Oaks are just an amazing tree. I can't think of a better tree than to see something like that in winter. But they are experiencing some problems, and there's been a bit of a decline. Partly due to two-line chestnut borer beetles. That's a natural insect pathogen of oak trees. They do the same thing that emerald ash borer beetles do, in that they chew. The larvae of this adult beetle here will chew away at the living vascular cambium, or the living green tissue that lies just underneath the bark, effectively girdling the tree. And so this is a tree in front of my house, actually, and you can see there's been some dieback and some pruning along the tips. And that's a good indication of two-line chestnut borer. I lost one tree I had to get rid of. I'll probably end up having to get rid of this one if I want to make sure that or try to stop this from spreading to my other oaks. But anyways, oaks, the two-line chestnut borer, like a lot of pathogens, tend to attack trees that are already stressed. So there are other factors that play with this particular thing. Oak. So then we get into things like, what can we do then? So we've got some weeds, that are positioned underneath or nearby the forest, and we have the possibility that very large openings in the canopy may be forming over time, maybe in the short term as well. So what I'm going to describe is based on past experience, past and present work experience, volunteer experience as well. And the recommendation, sounds like it's the last slide, it's not, but it's just the recommendations for approaching something like this, where you've got a very large area of land, you've got like a landscape level issue. First is to undertake a reconnaissance level field investigation, and that would be to get a ranging shot on where the real problematic areas are, where the high quality habitat is, high quality interior habitat, determine priority areas for restorative work, okay? And again, you may prioritize based on quality of interior habitat rather than trying to manage a thin eyelash fringe of trees next to a residential development. You might want to devote your time into areas that have the capability of supporting some diversity and wildlife and actually being functional. Priority areas would be based on level of infestation, for instance. If you have an area that is just absolutely wall to wall buckthorn, for instance, well, in the past, what we've done is we've saved those kind of places till last because they're just not going to get any worse. Focus on areas where there might be some residual native vegetation that can take the place of basically the holes that are left after you remove buckthorn. Also, and this is probably a point I should have placed at the top of this, and that is determine what's feasible. Is there anything that can be realistically accomplished, or is the horse left the barn? Now, that's a difficult question, and it depends on the kind of, let's say, threat to the ecological integrity of the area we're talking about. If you were to look at something like European buckthorn, yes, if you were to remove 1 acre of buckthorn from an infested area of a forest, you've changed the trajectory of that forest for decades. Once European buckthorn is pulled out, it's not like thistle, where it starts regenerating lateral roots and comes back and back and back, and it's almost a never-ending type of job. For reed canary grass that is restricted to the lower banks, I really don't know that there's much you can do to get rid of that, other than to restrict its spread by maintaining the health of the overstory and understory adjacent to it. Keep those shaded conditions in place. Again, so thistle is another thing. I know that the Save Our Seine River has a land management committee, I think led by Wilma Sotis, who has done very commendable work in removing thistle from priority sites adjacent to the Seine River, and that is very difficult work, and it's thankless work. It almost seems pointless because it comes back the next year too. One thought about thistle, if I can I'm just kind of going off the beaten path here. If manually pulling weeds, for instance, is your only option, then there's a strategy you can employ that can be injurious to the plant. And if all you can do is pull it manually, the best time to start doing that would be just as it's about to go into flower. So it's committed a lot of root reserves into producing above ground foliage, flowers, getting ready for that sort of thing. And then when you pull it out of the ground, it has to draw on existing root reserves, which are already stressed because time of the year and what it's been doing, and to try to regenerate foliage. If you also do that at the right time of the year, generally second or third week of June, it typically doesn't want to go back to flower because flowering is a photoperiod thing. It doesn't have enough time to produce flowers fast enough to take advantage of that time of the year. So it'll basically say, okay, I'll just go vegetative and then try again next year. Around the end of July, pull them once again. And that's especially injurious to the plant because it's used up more root reserves. It has what else? It's usually during drought, water deficit period. So that's a stressful time for a plant to suddenly be defoliated. And then pull it one more, anything that comes back, pull again in either the end of August or second week of September during that critical period of time when all plants, including noxious weeds, are translocating nutrients deep down into roots. If you cut off their ability to do that, then you've had a very productive year. But anyways, like I said, I didn't want to get too deep into technical information, but I know that's something land care does, and it might be of interest. And if somebody wants to talk a little bit more about that, I'm certainly open to doing that. In my experience, though, we've always, my work has usually been on a field scale level, and it's impractical to go on a multi-hectare site and be pulling thistle manually. Especially when it may come back to degrade the quality of the planting afterwards. So we use herbicide, but we don't over apply. We do it at a time as that is most injurious to the plant, least amount of collateral damage, and at a time, and again, during the right time of the year, so you don't have to apply too much and you don't have to apply excessive amounts, just at the right time of the year. Once you've decided you can actually go ahead and do something, and I'm gonna go a little further into the experience I've had with buckthorn, develop a restorative strategy. Don't just go out and with some extractigators or some tools, spend an afternoon pulling a buckthorn and then call it a day. Develop a restorative strategy based on site priority, using proven effective tactics as well, and time of year work. Identify partners to assist in executing the strategy. Phase in the work in a manner that is consistent with available resources and support. And I'll get into those very items very shortly. Again, I mentioned reed canary grass, one of those plants that doesn't play nice in the sandbox with anything else. The best way to restrict that is to maintain competitive, desirable vegetation in adjacent areas. Thistle, I just kind of went over that again, but it's one of those things where we find it growing on the edges of forests because lawnmowers can't reach them. For instance, the city works very hard in maintaining green spaces, in mowing weeds where they can at the right time of the year. Winnipeg's a big city. It's a difficult task to do that. And there's also provincial regulations on the use of herbicides that don't necessarily enable the city to go in and control where they would like to, and where would, so there's a balancing act. But the message is basically get in and get rid of weeds at a low state of infestation before it gets to a large field scale set of level of infestation. Now, I'm going to buckthorn here, and this is probably something I wanted to focus on a bit, because it is something that you can reverse. It is something you can change. It's easier said than done, but my experience has been that with a strategy, a reasonable strategy, and appropriate tactics, you can take something like this and reverse this trend. But it takes the help of others. It's not just one person, one well-meaning person, and it takes coordination among different stakeholders. Now, here is a photograph. I did some volunteer work with initially anyways, at Munson Park. My wife and I used to live near Munson Park. Munson's on Wellington. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time here, but I do have some slides here that I think are going to make the point. These are shots from the Munson area. Again, the shrub itself, European buckthorn, will grow to about 5 meters. So it'll grow into the tree canopy, the low small tree canopy height. Normally, it's a shrub. In this case, and on the larger picture here, this is a very dense infestation of buckthorn that had been mowed once as kind of an experimental measure to see how one could go about controlling this. What we did first, and again, I was walking through Munson Park just because I lived in the area. I actually did not know what that shrub was. And once I learned what it was and learned a bit about it, I started to obsess a little about it and figured maybe it was something we can do. So my wife and I talked to the City Naturalist Services. They suggested that perhaps if we can get some ground level support, some volunteers to get in there and start, participating in this, then it would be worthwhile for them to go about deploying some city resources to assist with that. Green Team, Kristen Tuncher with the City of Winnipeg Naturalist Services was very helpful in getting this off the ground, in removing buckthorn from these natural areas. So what we started with basically was the only way that this plant can reproduce, and that is take out the specimens that are producing seeds. Now, European buckthorn have male plants and female plants. They don't occur on the female and male flowers do not occur on the same plant. So it's the female plants that you can identify because you can identify female plants because they are the ones that produce berries. So the good news about this here is that the mature specimens that are producing berries are actually I don't want to say uncommon, but they're a lot less frequent than you'd think. It's most of the infestations in areas, localized areas I've seen on the Seine are like those, plants in the 2 foot to 5 foot height. They're not producing berries. They're in the understory, but on the edge of the riverbank, you'll see these plants, and again, the branches are just dripping with berries. These are an example of some, again, this is a winter shot, sorry, but sometimes winter shots are better for illustrative purposes. This is a collection of mature berry producing plants, but this is this is an extreme example of what you see on the Seine River. And okay, going a bit further here. Now, going back to Munson Park, what we initially started off with was collecting some volunteers and undertaking mechanical control first. Okay, so once we got rid of the berry producing specimens, we cut off its ability to reproduce. We then went in with crews and these tools that are basically, they look like car jacks, but they're essentially a heavy manual tool that you can use to jack the plant right out of the ground. And it's very effective. It's an excellent workout, I'll tell you that. And we would basically spend, for a few years, we spent a few hours in the morning in June doing this kind of work. Now, we did this during the spring. And the reason we did this in the spring, even though it's harder to find the plant, it's harder to identify and distinguish because it's green and blends with everything else. We did it in spring because adjacent desirable vegetation, native vegetation like currant and aralia and chokecherry and Saskatoon, those kind of plants in June or in early spring still have the interest in expanding into new voids like those previously occupied by a buckthorn that was removed. So by doing the work in June, we utilized adjacent desirable vegetation's capacity and capability to spread laterally into new opportunities. New opportunities, of course, being recently vacated and exposed earth. So that was a good strategy, especially where parts of the park vegetation had the capability to do the revegetation for you, basically. This is kind of what it looked like after we finished removing buckthorn. So we're left with a mix of native woody species and forbs or herbaceous specimens, and a lot of exposed earth. In some places where we had extremely dense stands, and it was almost too much to get in there. You couldn't use the tool. The tool couldn't, for some reason, in some areas, the tool that we were using, the extractigator, we couldn't really get it around the stem at the base of the plant. So what we did is we waited for everything else to go to sleep in the fall. And in late September or early October, I think it was early October actually, we applied a Roundup to this area here. Now, there was no residual effect, at least that I could detect, because we weren't killing other plants, because all the other plants were dormant. They weren't taking anything up, water, nutrients, herbicide, anything. So we did some spot spraying in this area. Well, we had a licensed professional applicator who worked with us on this by the name of Urban Jungle actually did this. I ended up meeting up with Gerard D'Souza of Urban Jungle, and he and I worked together since on a few projects. And what has happened on this site is that you do the work and you do the spray in this particular case in October. And when the plant is still metabolizing, it's still translocating nutrients deep into its roots and carrying that chemical deep down into its roots. And that is probably the most important and most effective time of the year to control this particular plant. For thistle, you would do the same thing if you had the option of using a herbicide. You would do the same thing in late August or middle of September for the same reasons. It'll take that chemical right down deep into the roots along with everything else it's trying to translocate. So what we started seeing in these areas, and this is the area, one of the areas that got sprayed, we're seeing in the following spring, much to my surprise, because I really did not know what was going to come back here. The buckthorn was that thick. It was the area that we saved to the last because we knew it wasn't going to get any worse. So we focused on areas where natural regeneration could do the work for us. But much to my surprise, in these areas that had been sprayed, we were getting basswood coming back, Manitoba maple. I believe meadow rue here. This is meadow rue. There's some sweet Sicily, and also there was trillium. There was one trillium Kristen had pointed out to me a couple of years ago, and I hadn't been able to find it since until we did the spray on this particular heavy area of infestation. And next thing you know, there's trillium popping up all over the place. So they had been just hanging on by their fingernails for years, I guess, just putting up one leaf here and there, just waiting for an opportunity to produce a flower. And here you can see there's elm seedlings here as well. This here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this is star-flowered Solomon seal. This is an excellent plant because it spreads laterally and almost forms a forest sod in places. Sod maybe is a bit, that's more of a grass term. I'm exaggerating a bit, but it forms a dense stand that's friendly to tree seedling establishment and shrub establishment. Western Canada violets. We also had yellow downy yellow violets come back in this area as well. A lot of really desirable vegetation. Smooth sweet Sicily, a bit of a blurry shot, but you get the idea. Here's that star-flowered Solomon seal. There's some Aurelia coming back. There's some choke cherry seedlings. We actually got a really good response without having to do any planting whatsoever. And in places, I frankly was surprised to see what was coming back. There was also Ohio Buckeye came back, because there was one Ohio Buckeye that I'm aware of at Munson Park. And the squirrels have been taking the fruit and basically burying them in, and wherever we cleared out the weedy vegetation, we were starting to get buckeye coming back. Oh, buckeye is the middle plant, by the way. Basswood from left to right. This is a basswood sapling. Ohio Buckeye coming up, and then Manitoba maple. So this is the kind of thing we're seeing come back. Here is the first area we went into to begin mechanically removing. And this is it, I think 2 years or a year after, I think it's the following like August or something like that. And again, we're starting to see a lot of excellent regeneration along the ground layer. We're seeing the canopy layer start to express a bit more. There's trees, saplings, or seedlings establishing. There every now and then we had to go back and look for some seedlings, some buckthorn seedlings. And the nice thing about that is that most of the seedlings were localized around where seed producing plants were previously situated and had since been removed. Now, to do the work mechanically was very time consuming, and it would be a very long game. About halfway through the process, I ran into urban jungle. Next thing I know, a third-party benefactor provided a little bit of funding, and we were able to really accelerate this work in a very efficient manner that didn't really break any bank accounts. It was an inexpensive procedure, and again, it was based on applying the right tactics at the right time of the year to elicit a favorable response in a desirable residual vegetation. We really didn't. I know we did some planting. The City Naturalist Services provided tree plantings and shrub plantings. I scattered a little bit of native seed in a couple of places where the light conditions permitted, and so it was a real kind of a team effort from the city contractor, a benefactor, some direction from me, and volunteers. And I think this park is well on its way. We've certainly changed everybody working on this particular project has changed the future of this particular patch of forest. When it comes to the Seine River, in areas, what do you do with the plant material after you've pulled it up or cut it down? Like the larger trees producing specimens, you can't really pull them out manually. So what we do is you can either girdle the bark and apply basically like a fungal pathogen. There are some new products out there right now. You can also cut the tree stump and apply a little bit of Roundup to the live green tissue around the stump, and then cover it off so that the plant at that time of the year takes up that little bit of Roundup, and a plastic bag wrap around the stump will generally prevent it from suckering and producing new plants. Now, what do you do with the biomass? I'm not trying to commit anybody to doing this, but if I was managing the Seine River, I would organize the strategic and timely removal of seed producing plants, make a pile, and maybe if there's an opportunity, work with the city to see if perhaps the slash from European buckthorn could simply be burned alongside trees that have been culled, like Dutch elm or American elm. You know what I mean? So there's usually on the river, you can see this kind of thing, just basically slash piles being burned. And this would be a good way to get rid of some of the biomass. But that's, again, easier said than done, and that requires planning and coordination. Additional considerations. Now, high quality habitat is really only as good as the stewardship practices that are practiced both in and around the area. Now, by that, I mean, it could be the Seine River Greenway. It could be an ecological reserve, like a prairie forest or alvar preserve, provincial or federally protected areas like the Tallgrass Prairie Reserve, those kind of things. Those kind of landscapes are only as good as the stewardship practices around them. Now, occasionally, as part of normal city operations, sometimes the city has to go in and repair an outfall. Outfalls are part of the sewer system. They drain the streets, and the water spills into the river. And but every now and then, those features, that infrastructure needs to be maintained or replaced or upgraded. And sometimes that means you have to go into the forest or bring a machine onto a site. Normally, there's a right of way, an existing path where a machine can access. And the city, I know, takes great care not to remove trees or disturb the ground and to disturb the ground as little as possible. This is an example of an outfall repair. This is actually just about a 90-second walk away from my living room. and it's a very familiar site, and there was an existing pathway, almost like a prairie trail through the trees. You could drive a car down there if you really wanted to. You shouldn't, I don't recommend that. So there was some riprap needed to get replaced around the shoreline to stabilize the pipes. There was a lot of earth removed. The crew that went in there did a fantastic job. Like, I wasn't watching them, but they did a great job, because they're there. It's a construction site, then all of a sudden they're gone, and it's like nobody was there. The site was left in an uncompacted, lumpy state, which is excellent, because the last thing when you want to restore an area like this is to try to revegetate into compacted clays. That's a really difficult situation to try to establish desirable vegetation. And there's been some erosion control measures taken here. Now, as I mentioned, it's necessary to do this kind of work. It's part of living in a city. It's part of having infrastructure. And every now and then, some trees have to come down. And like I said, the city typically takes good care not to minimize the damage, but every now and then something has to go down. And so when we make a mark on the planet, or on our landscape, or in the greenway, for instance, it's not so much the disturbance that is important, it's how the site is reclaimed. Now, in this, I should back up here. Whoops, I'm all over. I should really stop pressing buttons here. There we go. In a site like this, you take that, we talked about succession. There's been a disturbance. For instance, here is some disturbed ground. So you have to think about it in terms of succession. How would this kind of landscape reclaim itself naturally, and what's the best way to go about doing that, the most ecologically friendly way to go about doing that? And typically in this part of the world, native grasses are a very important kind of structural foundation of early stages of habitat reclamation. Native grasses don't require a lot of nutrient. Upland native grasses, anyways, don't require a lot of nutrient and water. They provide a very competitive ground cover, but a ground cover that is still friendly to the establishment of trees, be they planted or be they something that is infiltrated onto the site, like an aspen or something, things that spread laterally, or a seedling from a basswood. So typically the approach I've taken on the one that I learned and have since gone on to implement is that in a site like this, and this site stretches for about 50 meters or so up the slope, maybe a little less, is to establish a competitive and robust stand of native grasses that are appropriate to the site, and to plant shrubs and trees, a few shrubs and trees into it. The grasses don't compete too heavily with shrubs and trees. Depends on what kind of grasses you have in there. In this particular site, we've got shade conditions, so a open native grassland, tall grass prairie kind of situation may not be the most appropriate, but I can think of a couple of native and commercially available grasses that you can buy as seed that would be absolutely the perfect fit for something like this site. And in fact, those species do occur up and down the rivers from time to time. Just a note on native grasses. Again, like I said, it forms a competitive ground cover. It's an important part of restoring disturbed ground in this particular part of the world, because that's part of our natural history. A properly installed selection of native grass species as part of a riverbank reclamation project. This is not maybe the best picture for that, because this is this big blue stem. This is out in Sage Creek, where we did a little bit of work out there last year, restoring a disturbed area. And properly installed selection of native grass species incorporated into a tree shrub planting should be used to create a competitive and long-lived ground cover that is ecologically appropriate to the area, but also is your best line of defense against weed encroachment. The most sustainable way to control weeds at the landscape level, really, is to establish desirable, competitive vegetation, long-lived vegetation, site-appropriate vegetation. In this part of the world, I keep saying in this part of the world, native grasses are supremely adapted to our climate and most of our soil conditions. Again, I kind of just said that. I mentioned before that native plantings are not really resource intensive. We don't fertilize generally on native grass stands, as they don't particularly need to, although we will in certain circumstances. It's a more hospitable environment to establish trees and shrubs or woody specimens. Thistle, reed canary grass, and certainly European buckthorn will restrict the natural regeneration of native trees and shrubs, but will also, it's very difficult to plant into those kind of plant communities like smooth brome, quackgrass, thistle, reed canary. Those are extremely competitive ground covers. They're very resource intensive. They compete heavily with even with container sized or burlap caliper size specimens as well. You can get one to establish and it'll survive, but because of this intense competition exerted by weeds, the productivity of those installed specimens can be slowed down or can be undermined. Additional considerations. It is a good idea to ensure, now when there's work being done on the river or nearby the river, it is a good, what needs to be done, and what often is, but often not as well, to ensure that specifications, construction specifications, provide adequate scheduling and resources and performance criteria for the proper establishment of desirable, ecologically appropriate vegetation. Any type of work that doesn't call for reclamation through revegetation, effective revegetation, is like inviting weeds to colonize the disturbed ground. Any disturbed ground in this time, in this day and age, needs to be restored. It is not a complicated process, but restored to something desirable, because if you don't, what's going to come in is a weed. 200 years ago, when we really didn't have thistle problems or quackgrass problems, what would come back naturally would be just something native, something site appropriate. Here we have adjacent weed encroachment to consider, and we need to get the good plants in first before the bad ones do. Ensure that the proper biological expertise is involved at the front end of the project and through to implementation, establishment, and handoff. Now, that's the kind of thing I do, and I'm sorry if that may sound a little self-serving, but it is a fact. And so what the biologist does is thinks about or plans for completing the work according to construction specifications at the time of handoff or project completion. But what the biologist is doing also during this work and in planning the work is thinking about what that site looks like 5 years from now, 10 years, 15 years from now. That's the applied ecologist is thinking about those kinds of things and planning and designing and installing, implementing with that in mind. The performance, the completion date on a project is not the ultimate objective. It's what kind of long-term footprint are you leaving as a revegetation ecologist on the face of the planet? Now, hopefully you can see this. There is, coming to the last couple of slides here, and we're talking about restorative measures within the Greenway. But there's also, as I mentioned before, and this is my opinion, but I think it's defendable, that the quality of the habitat is only as good as the stewardship practices around it. And that means we have a very long greenway here. That's a big area to try to manage. It's a big area to try to maintain, but there are multiple stakeholders that are involved in, or that sit adjacent to the river, and that would be there's recreational uses. There's private, semi-private, and public golf courses, private residential properties, public rights of way, commercial areas. So there's a lot of different land uses, styles of land management, attention to detail, but really to effectively protect a greenway like this is really it's a community effort. There are measures you can take in restoring disturbed areas as a result of construction, or restoring areas that have become infested with weeds. But in the big picture, the protection of areas like this is very much a consideration that almost needs to be culturally ingrained in society in general. The same way you hear about, you go to Vancouver or something, and somebody will instinctively pick up a wrapper of the sidewalk, whether it's on their property or not, put it in the garbage. It's very clean streetscapes. It's the same kind of mentality almost needs to go into how we treat, how we are stewards of these kinds of landscapes. So I don't it's kind of a weird place to end, because maybe not a weird place to end, but it's a that's kind of the challenge, I think is getting everybody to pull in the same direction. And certainly the Save Our Seine organization is an excellent resource and advocate and conduit for these kinds of sentiments, and that we can talk about, but hopefully implement on the ground in the future, possibly starting sooner than later. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. And like I said, there's a lot of, I'll just very quickly say, there may or may not be some questions, but if there are some questions, I gotta warn you ahead of time. I could go down a wormhole, and it's because it's very difficult to stay on track, because, like I said, the answer is it depends very often. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was so informative, and you're truly a wealth of knowledge on this topic. So we do have a few questions. One question was, is really around buckthorn. Does buckthorn actually serve as a habitat for some birds and other creatures that we should be concerned about?
Your waxwings eat the berries. I'd rather they didn't, because they're going to spread them. But yeah, I don't think that plant has any particular key habitat value, although some animals will eat the berries.
Okay, thank you. Another question was again around the buckthorn. So at we've been experimenting with using black plastic bags on the buckthorn with the Seine River Keepers group, and just wondering about tips around that and what you think about that.
Oh, I think it's very effective. I've seen the city do it as well. I've seen the results of that, and I think it's very effective. And like anything else, if it's done right, it works and it's effective. It's a bit labor. I wouldn't say that terribly labor intensive, actually, but it's a good approach. That's what we should do. Definitely.
And then another question is, do you have any tips about burdock?
Oh, burdock is that's a biennial. And what I've done now, that's kind of a difficult one, because it's got a very, very large taproot, like basically a carrot that can grow up to 2 feet into the ground. What I have done, if I've been, like, for instance, our work at Munson, I would have a shovel with me, and I would, after we'd done in the morning working, I would go around the shoreline, and wherever I saw a rosette, I would just basically stick the spade about 4 to 6 inches under the ground, and just basically cut it off there, and then lever it up, and then it has to start over again. So chances are the plant, if you do that at the right time of the year, it's probably not going to go to seed. Typically they're a biennial, but I think they can go for a third year too as well, or they might even be a short-lived perennial too. But yeah, it's more of a mechanical thing. They have I don't really know how well they respond to things like Roundup, but they occur so close to the water, I'm not sure I would recommend that kind of approach. But if you stay on them like anything else, you can get rid of them. Yeah.
Chris, are you seeing any other questions there, or is anyone else seeing any questions?
Okay, given the voracious appetite of deer and rabbit in parts of the Seine River, what makes sense in determining what to do with rewilding flora? Oh, maybe that's a phone call, or maybe I don't know, Fenella Timmerman. I can't answer that question in a timely fashion. That's a difficult one. Rewilding wood anemone. Yeah, wood anemone is a great plant. It spreads. I would probably put a plug in. You can buy them from Prairie Flora or from Prairie Originals. I know they have anemone on a regular basis, and if you plant it in the right place, they'll spread laterally. So one plant will be 5 plants in the next couple of years. Thistles have taken over disturbed land, mainly following construction and also in areas in excessive dumping concrete. This is particularly in places where thistles cannot be mowed, including lightly forested areas. Removing seed heads and in June, July has made a significant difference. And in some areas, goldenrod and milkweed are taking over from thistles. Fantastic. If you're seeing that response, keep doing it.
Chris, I've got a couple of questions here.
Sure, you bet.
Is poison ivy natural?
Yes.
It is? Okay.
Yeah.
Another question, is caragana an issue on the Seine? I think I see some and not sure how to deal with it.
Caragana is, well, I mean, if it's there and you're determined to get rid of it, you could try to control it the same way you would control buckthorn. You cut it down and apply in a stump application. You may also find you just simply have to yard it out with a backhoe or a small or light equipment. I don't have much experience in the way of managing caragana. I just wouldn't advise it be planted. That's all.
Okay, another question. Chris, are you aware of any aquatic invasive species that are of concern to the Seine, or are you strictly a land plant-based guy?
No, I'm aware of aquatic invasives as well, but I don't think I'm not an expert in all invasive species, like for instance, vertebrate or invertebrate invasive species. But yeah, there are some plants that can be problematic. Now, when you say aquatic, when you say aquatic, I think something that grows in the water column. It's floating vegetation. But you can also, aquatic may also refer to deep emergent vegetation like cattails or bulrushes. Bulrushes don't really occur on the Seine River. Problematic species, other than some of the shoreline grassy specimens, I don't really see much. I'm certain there are, but I most of my time on the Seine River has been spent kind of in the upland area. Yeah.
Is there any sweetgrass along the Seine?
Well, I can't say that there isn't, but if you were looking for some, you would go to a place a wet meadow type of environment, or low prairie, something that holds water maybe for a few days longer after a rain than the adjacent areas, like a run-on site, not deep water, shallow, wet meadow conditions, absence of reed canary grass. Those are the places I would look if you're looking for it. And
Okay.
I'm sure it occurs in the area somewhere, but I haven't seen it.
Okay. Do we still have a problem with purple loosestrife on the Greenway?
I haven't seen, there are places where there's no tree canopy, where yes, I've seen purple loosestrife. I saw it years ago in the Bois des Esprits. It's probably been removed since then. It's one of those plants that does not like shade. So it's usually the shoreline environment that on the parts of the river I'm most familiar with. I've never seen it, but I'm sure it does occur in some open areas. But it's one of those plants where you often will see it in a ditch or in a marsh. But in areas where there's like massively fluctuating water levels, like for instance, the Assiniboine or the Red River in spring, you'll get, it's like feast or famine. It'll be like everything will be inundated in the spring, and then it'll be almost droughty by the time July rolls around. It doesn't really like those kind of conditions. No perennial vegetation really like those kind of bank conditions. But on a place like the Seine, where yes, you do get spring freshet, a short-lived spring freshet, I could see that there would be some places where you'd find it.
Okay. And we're going to finish up by 7:30. So do get your questions in if anyone has any. And Chris, you've got a source of questions there, I think, if you've got any more there.
Yeah. I think between you and I, we've gotten to the questions.
Okay.
I'm sorry if I missed something here.
Yeah, I'm just checking as well. A lot of people are saying that they really appreciate all the information, Chris. So we're thankful for your presentation.
And thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, this was fantastic. So let's have a cheer for Chris. We really appreciate your knowledge and wisdom, and we will now, I think we'll all have different eyes looking at the Seine River Greenway. If those of you that do want to get more involved, you can contact our co-chairs of our land care committee, Leah and McKenna. So you can get in touch with them. You can just contact us through our website, and there's a place there to post a question. If you have other questions about land care or any of these topics, we can pass them along to Chris as well. I do want to mention, and I did put this up into the chat, that some of you were at our meeting in February where we had an information session on the proposed plan Winnipeg 2045. It's really important, as I mentioned in the chat, to check out Ours Winnipeg, the Ours Winnipeg website, because that will have important implications on the long-term planning for our greenway. And we're concerned that it's opening the doors to development. And Dougal Lamont actually also mentioned something in the chat that there's also some plans in place for some wider implications for planning. There was one more question, I think. I just saw it and then it disappeared. But
yes, the question was, are there any shrubs that deer do not like?
Yeah, but I tell you what, I'm not here to promote any particular product, but I found a product called Scoot at Canadian Tire. It's just basically you mix it with water, you apply it to the bark or some foliage, and deer leave it alone. So Scoot, and I applied it in the fall, and this spring I can still see where I had applied it. The deer had left it alone. So this year I'm going to get some growth on my shrubs.
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you, Chris, and I'll hand it over to McKenna.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Yes, I know Victoria put it down in the chat, so if you guys want to give Save Our Seine a lookout, if you guys want to get connected with us, you guys can get connected with us there. And yeah, thank you guys again. I hope you have a good St. Patrick's Day for the rest of your evening. And if Victoria just wants to go ahead and put that slideshow back on, we'll play some music and you guys can have a great evening.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.